and welcome to tonight's Black History Month Business Forum. It is very exciting and inspiring to see so many people and members of the Boston business and civic communities out tonight. It says a lot that we have so many individuals here, especially on a long holiday weekend. Thank you. I want to also extend our thanks and gratitude to Senator Ed Markey and Boston's newly elected Mayor Martin Walsh. Along with other members of our distinguished panel for taking time out of their busy schedules to share their ideas and perspectives about what actions can be taken to increase diversity in Boston's business community, so that minority and women-owned businesses and firms can have access to more abundant and lucrative business opportunities as we move forward with the new political and economic landscape. The challenges faced by MWBEs in the city of Boston and the state to secure the type of business opportunities that will facilitate financial and operational growth is a compelling issue that we need to address tonight to ensure that it becomes a key framework for action and a critical component for Boston's new political and economic landscape. The stark reality is that many Boston-based MWBEs are struggling on their own to achieve a foothold in the mainstream business community because they do not have the base of support necessary to develop strategic relationships or alliances with members of Boston's prime business community. Nor do they have the collective political clout to advocate for important legislative or municipal policies that require the inclusion of MBEs on public contracts. Just as importantly, because of the size and capacity of these companies, many MWBEs are viewed as mom and pop operations, which have not earned the right to get their foot into the door of the downtown business organizations, frequented by leaders in the business, the public sector, and academia. As we know, this level of exposure is crucial to networking and building the type of relationships that can ultimately lead to viable business opportunities and help these firms become a part of the mainstream business community. If these attitudes prevail, MBEs may not ever get the opportunity to achieve any large measure of success in the city of Boston. The following statistics tell the true story of this reality. Number one, Hispanic businesses account for only 0.3% of total business revenue in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which average annual sales of $127,530. Number two, African-American-owned businesses account for only 0.2% of total business revenue in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, with average annual sales of $85,000. Number three, most of these businesses are so small that only 1 in 10 have employees. Number four, of all minority-owned businesses in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, less than 1% have revenues in excess of $1 million. This is disturbing. And it's not about lack of smarts. It's not a lack of capability. It's the lack of opportunities. I hope these compelling statistics have given you a broader perspective about why these issues need to be addressed, and now. In order to get the panel discussion underway, I have the honor and the privilege to introduce Stephen Rogers, who will serve as the moderator of tonight's panel discussion. Mr. Rogers is the Harvard Business School professor of entrepreneurship and also serves as a senior lecturer in general management. He also teaches the field immersion experience for leadership development and the Harvard MBA program.
As Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel stated shortly after he was elected, he said, "A thriving minority business community is essential in a world-class city." And this, my friends, is the great opportunity that Boston has, and that is to make its minority business community the strongest in America. For this to happen, there must be a partnership with the city of Boston, which is fast becoming a minority majority. In 1950, whites represented 94.7% of Boston. Today, that number is 53.9%. The minority community has grown exponentially, but sadly, while the population has grown dramatically, the city's dollars spent with minority businesses has been embarrassingly low. Unfortunately, we don't have those exact numbers because we tried to procure the exact numbers, but the city has not been keeping a record of the actual numbers of businesses or business that it has done with minority business owners. My own quick estimate is that the city, which has a budget of about $2.6 billion, has probably spent less than 10%, and that's probably been extraordinarily generous with minority businesses. In contrast, the city of Chicago spent over 30% of its dollars in 2013 with minority firms. This was the year following the new mayor's stated commitment to minority business inclusion, when he committed and spent $11 million to reinvigorate the minority business development program for the city of Chicago. In November 2013, Mayor Emanuel stated, "We are pleased that in 2013, nearly 4 out of 10 dollars paid out by the city went to minority and women-owned businesses." He said that businesses that do work for the city should reflect the diversity of the city.
I will give you a 3-point plan that I think that we have to put in place. 1, give minority-owned businesses access to capital. We need to continue to encourage a climate where venture capitalists are matched with minority-owned businesses. We need to make sure that government programs designed to encourage minority businesses remain funded. We are in the innovation district right now. Boston is growing, it's bubbling, it's bursting. You can feel this incredible energy now in Boston. We have a chance now to put together a plan as we move forward in this next generation. 2, we need to keep our graduates from the colleges that go here to stay here. We need to make sure that our cultural institutions for young minority graduates remain strong. We also need to ensure that the cost of living remains low and the quality of life remains high. We have to put together these young minority kids going to college in Boston with the businessmen from the high-tech sector. We have to find ways where we build large meetings, maybe at the convention center, where CEOs and minority students in colleges from all across this region come together, that they talk to each other about what the opportunities can be for minorities in Boston, in Massachusetts, in this region. That is what we need to do. You have to build the relationships, give people the opportunity to tell their story and to hear what is needed. That is why community colleges are so important. Roxbury Community College, Bunker Hill Community College is where the Charlestown State Prison was. Better use, of a space for what we should be doing with young men and women in our society, to give them a skill set that translates into what it is that they want to do with their lives. Because these young people, regardless of their race, they want the same kind of new technology skills. They have the same interest in all these new technologies that a kid from a highest income has. And they have the same aptitudes too, if we give them the access to it, and then we give them access to where the jobs are going to be that they can work. And third, we need to provide an educational workforce for the minority-owned businesses and majority-owned businesses. We have to make sure these young people have that skill set.
Last week, I announced John Barrows would be the new economic development chief in the city of Boston. John's background in creating businesses, nonprofits, and educational opportunities for the people of Roxbury and Dorchester. With him at the helm, minority and women-owned businesses will have a seat at the table and a champion at the highest level. Now, one of the things that we're going to look at is by using data. data to find out where there's opportunity, and data to find out where there's solutions. And that's something that hasn't happened before in City Hall. Also, we have to begin by starting at home. We can't expect to go out and build businesses and expect businesses to do something that 3.2%? 3.2% of the businesses are doing if we don't do it at home. So we're in the early stages of my administration, and the first appointments I made, even though they're not business, was with the police department, to make sure that 50% of the command staff were people of color. That's a message that we're sending out across the board. As we build my cabinet, to make sure my cabinet is 50% people of color. As we look throughout the departments, the department heads, to make sure it reflects the people of color in the city of Boston. That is something that I heard, we actually all heard on the campaign trail over and over and over. And during at one point, I believe there were 64 departments, 4 people of color in those 4 departments. Today, we're up to, I think it's 7 or 8, and we're just starting. That's not a pride, I don't want to clap for it, because we have a long way to go. But if we don't start in City Hall by setting the bar high, then how can I as mayor or we as a government expect other people to do the same?
Now, when you see this in the context of these 3 areas, clearly another area that we have to focus on is Dudley Square. Dudley Square, the kind of work that we need to embark on in planning is the same kind of principles that we're deploying here in the South Boston waterfront. That is, what is this place going to look like, and what are the kinds of jobs that we want to create there? Many of you know, of course, the historic importance of Dudley. It was, in fact, the gateway to the Shawmut Peninsula. And, of course, now it's the geographic center of the city. In fact, in many respects, it has greater potential than many of the districts that I've already outlined earlier. It actually is closer to more Boston residents than any of the other downtown or the innovation districts that we've recounted. Yes, the 3 of them. Now, it already has access, but clearly we need to invest more in creating greater access to this area. This map shows the Silver Line and the transit system that is already in place. But the yellow line shows another transit idea of new investment to create and connect Dudley to more of these radial transit lines. Now, if you take that green circle, that's about a quarter-mile radius around Dudley itself. What we need to plan for is about 3 times the growth in that area to create more housing, to create more nighttime residents, and to create more business and offices so that we can double or triple the daytime residences in this area, because we know that daytime residents and nighttime residents are critical in supporting businesses. Now, finally, I leave you with a drawing that shows the many things that, from a planning perspective, we need to be working on. Most important, of course, is growing the jobs. And the principles that we need to follow, Mayor Walsh has already outlined for us. There needs to be more housing, more affordability, and more accommodation specifically for workforce housing. Second is the smart choices in investing in our public infrastructure. And then, of course, Dudley being an example, to invest more in our neighborhood centers. And then we have to have an opinion about the kind of economic development and jobs that we bring to these neighborhoods so that we can attract the right kind of businesses and create the right kinds of jobs that are open and accessible to all of us.
Bottom line is that we have to really open the communication and dialogue. The collaboration has to happen, and it has to be real. And so when we see Mayor Marty Walsh, who talked in just his 2 months about the importance of taking businesses that are here on the waterfront, how can we entice them to come into neighborhoods all over the city of Boston? That work has to happen. We know in the 80s and 90s, we had the federal government on our side through empowerment zone legislation that focused on disadvantaged communities to give tax incentives to businesses to open up, to create jobs, and to create access. That has somewhat faded away. But in the legislature here, working with our city government, We need to work in collaboration with all of you to hear the issues, because we know there is opportunity for growth. We know if we want to build economic growth, move people out of poverty, bring people to self-sufficiency, we have to help with job creation. And you heard the data earlier on, and I think it was Darryl who said it. Businesses owned by people of color are 75% more likely to have staff that reflect them. But I believe businesses that are not owned by people of color, like businesses that are here in our great city, that are sitting here this evening, also care about this issue, also care about inclusion with women and people of color. So when you're putting together a proposal to apply for a state contract or to apply for the city of Boston, I want you to think of that. I want you to think of the reflection of who you're bringing to the table. I want you to think of your subcontractors. When you think of the lawyers and the law firms you're going to employ, I want you to think of our law firms here in our great city that are Black owned, that are women owned, in particularly that are Black or people of color owned, because we have them too. When you think of engineering companies you want to bring to the table, and it's okay because I know relationships, and I know you may be with a team, an architect, an engineer for a long, long time on developments for the last 20 years. But I'm saying to you now that in 2014, doesn't have to be all your projects, though would love to see at least 50% of your projects, doesn't have to be all of them. But I want you to take a moment, and I want you to go outside of your comfort zone. And I want you to reach out to the engineering firms that are people of color owned. I want you to reach out to the architects here in our great city. I want you to reach out to our communications, our marketing specialists that are owned by people of color and women here in our great city. And say that when you put a team together, the team is going to reflect this great city of ours. The team is going to reflect your priorities as a firm and as a company.
As you guys know, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a second-generation entrepreneur, and I think that, yeah, thank you. And I think that when I think about Black History Month, I know we always talk about the historical ones, but there's a lot of Black history in this room, you know. And I think again, what we're doing here today is Black history. Steve Rogers is Black history. You know what I mean? He is one of the founders of Black entrepreneurship and teaching it in Chicago, one of the cities that has the largest minority business population. We have Flash Riley here, who was one of the pioneers and so forth. You know, we have Colette Phillips, Darryl, myself. You know, we are Black history. We're living it right now. I have my team here somewhere. You know, they're Black history, making it happen. You know, so but I think Steve is right. One of the key things about Black businesses, and I think 20 years ago, the reason 20 or 30 years ago now, that it was put in place by government was because the goal was minority businesses typically hire minorities in minority communities, and economic development is the key to fixing our social ills that we have. But, and so we're hoping that, you know, really, as some of these this is a great time. We have a great opportunity with Mayor Walsh, and I'll get to why I've been asked to speak. And that is that he really has taken a proactive and a very unique approach to gathering data and gathering information on what would make the city, a better business climate, et cetera. I'm not quite at liberty because the report has not been issued to the public, or even he hasn't seen the report, so I'm not going to be able to share much about it. But he did put a team of about a cross-section of 34 people together. He had 2 team leaders, Donna Capello, who's he's the president, I'm sorry, of Verizon, and Pat Muscatillo from the Greater Convention Center, and we'll be presenting our report next week. But basically, we held 3 meetings, and 34 other members, many of whom are probably in this room. And we had 3 meetings and 1 public hearing, and we really encouraged people to come in and talk about A, the things that are working well in the city today, and B, the things that we would like to see happen, and C, the things that we really would like to see happen. And so it will be interesting to really see how all that plays out. I'm hopeful, I'm staying positive. I mean, because when there's someone new, You want to be hopeful for change. But as I said, and I'm really hopeful for this administration, and I'm really hopeful for some of the things that I've heard today, because being in business, I've been an entrepreneur for 11 years. I've had no government business. I've had a minimum, and I mean, I'm being candid. I mean, right now I'm starting to get a little. I mean, there was a policy put in place, but I mean, I'm really, really hoping that government stop. I mean, really, it's wonderful to say this is what I'm going to do. It's wonderful to say. I really don't think we need that many more studies. I think we have the statistics already. I think we just need to really look at, what are the policies that are in place? I mean, the same minority business program that's 30 years old has not been looked at. So one of the recommendations is to really revamp and look at making the minority and women business much more robust, much more effective, and how to go about doing that.
Our development goal is ambitious: to build the largest hotel in Boston, up to 1,500 rooms, a 21st century complex with not just hotel rooms and meeting facilities, but restaurants, retail, and maybe even a residential component. Our intent is to issue an RFQ, a request for qualifications, on March 7th to solicit responses from interested teams that will allow us to determine suitability to move on to an RFP round. Teams will have 2 months to respond to the RFQ, and it will be a pass-fail process, no ranking of teams. We just want to determine, can they do it or not? In planning for the issuance of the RFQ, Massport and the MCCA have adopted an objective of creating what we are calling meaningful minority participation that goes beyond the traditional requirements that each team have minority and women representation on the design team, on the construction team, and in the workforce. To our knowledge, this is the first time this type of language has been included in an RFP process, and I know I speak for my friend Tom Glenn in saying that we're proud that our agencies are at the forefront of this initiative. So, how does this happen? How can it be successful? And how can this be not just a one and done, but become part of our fabric of doing business in Boston? Well, I would submit, after 30 years of doing things like this, that there were 3 success factors: leadership that is committed and empathetic, strategy that is purposeful and supported by tactics, and partnerships that create opportunities. I mentioned the importance of committed political leadership that we have in our panelists and in others that are involved in this project. But it is also important that organizations like Massport and the MCCA be led by people with diverse perspectives. Our organizations are better for that.
The city has not had an MBA program for over 10 years. That's an opportunity for Mayor Walsh. The 5th and final one was the formation of the partnership, now run by the very capable Carol Fulp and longtime leader Benny Wiley. That organization was designed to retain the educated talent that came to Boston to study, but some years ago we had our image problems, not the case today. We wanted people to stay. So that's a context for today in terms of this event. So why is this panel in this place, in this year, and this time any different? Let me follow up and suggest a solution. Jim, you mentioned there are at least 2 ingredients. One is a determined will by leadership. I think that determined will is present. Secondly, and this is the one we really lacked, we've lacked a mechanism to implement change that is sustained. So I want to talk about that. The first place that we need support, and it's not the public sector, we'll come to them, it's the private sector. The Chamber of Commerce in this town needs to get with the program. They are not on the program. That's the Boston Chamber of Commerce. There are no black CEOs in this town. How are you going to tell anybody in the partnership that they should stay in our city past entry-level jobs when there are no African Americans in the C-suites? Help me with that conversation, please. Now, secondly, the chamber and the private sector do not have procurement rules and regulations. I was with an African American president of a college in our city just a couple days ago. There's two of them. You'll figure out who I'm talking about in a second. And so we were talking, and she said, you know, my office brought in a contract process procurement to clean our buildings, many buildings. And I said to the procurement officer, gee, that list looks a little narrow. Can we get some color on the list? Well, it's done right here. Brother Samuel's here. He's here. Where is he? Where are you? Done right, outstanding cleaning company, got a pretty big contract. Private procurement can be changed immediately. Chamber is important. The Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank needs to get back to the table and complete their paperwork on the absence of lending and ensure that the capital pool, you cannot start a business and you damn sure can't grow a business if you don't have capital. We can have all the opportunity that we want. With no capital, we go no place. Now I'll return to the public sector. John Barrow's appointment as Chief Development Officer is perhaps the most significant leadership step the city has ever made trying to change procurement and real estate outcomes for minority business procurement. John Barrows has got impact and influence, and he's ready for the task, and we should support him. Jimmy already mentioned our governor. Our governor, if you look at all of the boards that Governor Patrick controls, there is significant minority leadership and significant chairperson leadership. MCCA, Massport is among that list. Talk about not being afraid of power. When he had the one opportunity to do something significantly game-changing, he did it. And what was that? The appointment of Mo Cowan to the United States Senate. Big game changer. So this three-legged structure must be supplemented by all of the affinity groups. Some were mentioned: Black MBAs, AREP, Mass Black Lawyers Partnership, Mass Minority Contractors, and all their Latino and Asian counterparts. This group needs to convene at the Federal Reserve Bank. I'll make the appointment. 45 days from this meeting. And we have to meet. This is not going to be an easy process. This is a 3 to 5 year process. We should start in 45 days and be prepared to come back to this very room this next time next year. We have a great opportunity. I believe we have determined will for the leadership, and I believe we now have a mechanism. Thank you very much.